was beer on the bus all the time, and our bus driver, Akasaka from New Japan Pro Wrestling, he had these things called 2-and-ohs. And so the referee, Masao Hattori,
in trouble.
you remember? You're not getting in trouble. Remember Masao Hattori? That was the referee in Japan, our friend. He's still alive, still a good guy. Anyway, he got Masao with a couple 2-and-ohs in his beer, and we saw Masao doing this, and everybody thought that was funny. He was just going up and down the bus, like every time, like he was falling down. Whenever Akasaka would slow down, he'd go toward the front. Whenever he'd speed up, he'd go toward the back, and he was just totally messed up. And so Paul decides to do this to me, and all of a sudden I'm feeling really weird. And we're in this little town where they make these wooden dolls, and we stayed in these rooms, and they put Paul and I in the same room, and they had these beds that had what's called, I think they're called, not yukatas, but they're flat little mats, and you're on a hardwood thing. That's your mattress. And there's about 20 of them in the room. And I just remembered laying down, and all of a sudden I woke up, and I was drugged, and he drugged me. And when I woke up, I was like in a tunnel. I was in something I remember I just didn't know where I was, and I was fighting to get out as hard as I could. And he had stacked up 20, 25, as many mattresses of those little mattresses there were. He stacked them all up on top of me, and it crushed it between the top beds. So I'm down here, and all the mattresses are forcing me down where I can't move now. I'm trying to move and get out, and I'm screaming, help me, so loud. And in Japan, I don't know what's happening because I'm drugged, and I'm stuck between two beds with all these mattresses on top of me. I can barely breathe. Oh God, you were brutal.
You're lucky you didn't die, actually.
I know it's crazy.
We had a good time.
Was Paul Orndorff a good guy?
Oh, wonderful. Paul was one of my buddies. And I never will forget one time. Here's a story for you. We were around the New Jersey Turnpike, and we were in Elizabeth, New Jersey. And I think the hotel we were staying in was a Ramada Inn or a Howard Johnson's at that time. I think it was maybe Howard Johnson then. And you know how those roads are around there, trying to get to those places. Sometimes you can see where you want to go, but you can't get to it. You just can't get to it. And you have to start around and go back around. And then if you miss it, you're off again. Paul had did that for 4, 5, 6 times, and he missed that turn one more time. He was so upset, he yanked back on the steering wheel and pulled it completely off the column. Imagine telling that to Budget Rental. So anyway, but he did that one time. And but yeah, I like Paul. He's a Southern boy too, down in Florida guy. And I used to always enjoy being around him and his humor and stuff. He could be kind of intense, but if he knew you, he was real cool. So I had a lot of fun with Paul Orndorff.
What do you remember about your feud with Paul Orndorff in NWA?
Very short, because that was a long time ago. And I remember I was there, Killer Brooks and Orndorff, and then we had something where, for the first time, and it got some of the things I wound up doing were first-time things. I got some good talk in those days because Orndorff had the National Heavyweight Championship in Atlanta, and it was kind of obvious if I wrestled Orndorff. So we did something where I helped Killer Brooks cheat, and Killer Brooks had the belt, but he was like a big, dumb sidekick, nasty guy. And I was the asshole. So I bought the belt, and then I paraded around like the National Heavyweight, but everybody hated me because you bought the belt, you asshole. When no one's ever done that before. So it's kind of a cool thing at the time. And then I worked with Paul a little bit, but then I think Paul went up to WWF shortly.
Yeah. I guess you also must have known him in WCW, and we recently did an interview with Vader, and Vader told us about the little altercation that they had there. Were you around at all?
What altercation? Oh, him and Orndorff?
Were you around for that?
Oh, a couple, yeah. No, I wasn't around. I think that was at Center Stage.
Yeah.
Him and Orndorff got in a fight or something?
Yeah, Vader was giving us a different version than the one Paul had, so I was just...
Oh, okay. So, you know what? I wasn't there. The story I remember is Orndorff basically slapped the crap out of him. And that's happened to a few guys in the back that you wouldn't think. I mean, one time Jericho front face locked Goldberg and was choking Goldberg out. And he said, well, if I let you go, are you going to stop? And Goldberg went, no. Okay. So he didn't let him go. But, some of these guys don't realize that if you don't wrestle, you're going to get in trouble.
What happened with that supposed fight with you and Paul Orndorff?
Well, what happened was we was giving Paul Orndorff a ride. We was in Columbus, Ohio, going to Dayton from Columbus. And whoever Paul was riding with, evidently, because he was very temperamental as young, he's still temperamental. And they didn't want to give him a ride back. They didn't want him back in the car. So me and Tommy gave him and Brian Blair a ride back to Dayton. So Paul sat in the car. He said, what the fuck is that smell? What the F is that smell? I kept saying, so I said, they're my barbecue ribs. So he said, well, I'm going to throw them out. I said, Paul, you throw them ribs out, I'll throw you out with them. Jokingly, I wasn't serious about it or nothing. I was in a very good mood. So then Paul started hitting the back of Tommy Rich's seat, pull the F over, pull the F over, pull over. So Tommy said, shit, let me pull over for the guy make me wreck the car. So he pulled over. Paul jumped out the car. I said, did this guy really want to fight me? And Tommy said, it looked that way. So I opened up the door. As I was coming out of Tom, he tried to sucker punch me. Well, I was a collegiate wrestler, not a football player like him. So I leg dived him, took him down, and cratered him. Finally, Tommy came over and broke us up, him and Blair. Tommy, what he was doing is he was trying to get me to let him go. Because once I put you in a crater, you can't get out of my crater. Anybody that know anything about wrestling, did it in collegiate wrestling, I wrap my leg around this leg, I take that leg, I hook it, go around your head, so your knees are up to your face.
Right.
So my ear was right beside his mouth. And I never felt the bite. I didn't know I was bitten until I got in the car. So we got back in the car. I said, Paul, what the hell was all that about? He said, oh, I'm sorry. He said, I'm just not in a good mood today. And then Tommy looked over and said, Tony, your ear is bleeding. You're bleeding. So I'd pull down the visors, look at my ear. My earlobe right here was hanging. So Tommy said, you don't want to go around your whole life looking like that. He said, why don't I go by the hospital to get it stitched up? Went by the hospital, got it stitched up. And the doctor kept me overnight because they gave me a technical shock. Because he said a human bite is the worst bite that anyone can have. Next morning, me and Paul, we made up and forgot about it. But I hear several interviews about what Paul said, and everything he said is wrong. I don't mean to call him a liar, but he lied. Paul could not whoop me on his best day. If you don't believe me, if he had plenty of chances to do something against me, who was in the ring. And neither time in the ring was he able to handle me inside or outside the ring. The only thing he could do against Tony Atlas is bite. Period.
You were there that night that Tony and Paul Orndorff got into it. Could you give me your version of the story?
I just wanted, they were just arguing about something, and one thing led to another. They pulled in between two tractor and trailers. Tony got Paul in a bear hug, and Paul bit his ear about off, his earlobe, and that was about the end of the fight. Tony said he cheated. I guess in a street fight, I don't know what cheating is, but, I hated to see it because I like Paul and I like Tony too. It just, them steer runs, everybody was high strung back then. And, just Tony said he could whoop anybody. And Paul said, you can't whoop anybody. And one thing led to another. Next thing you know, we pulled over and they was out there tussling.
Yeah, Tony said that Paul had bit him because Tony was winning. And
yeah, Tony had him in a bear hug. What Paul couldn't do nothing. But that's old school. He bit his ear, said his earlobe was hanging about off,
So Tony's telling the truth there because I guess in Paul's version, Paul was winning and then he bit him even though. Okay.
It never even went, it wasn't like it was boom, boom, or this. They swung a couple of times. Tony grabbed him in a bear hug and then Paul bit him and it was over, just that quick, So, who wins in that situation? I don't think there's no winner anyway.
Vader spent a very short time in the Dungeon of Doom. Why was it so short? He just didn't fit in?
No, they gave me Vader, and I said, no, this guy needs to be by himself. I mean, Vader drew money. You know Vader. He drew money. He was believable. I'm going to tell you a story that I've never said. Vader went downhill, and I saw it happen in 3 seconds. After this incident, he was never Big Van Vader again. I'm waiting for Vader to cut a promo. He can tell his story. I saw it.
He did actually tell us the story. I don't know if you saw that, his version to us, but
I'll tell you the story. I was there. Paul comes to me and said, he's getting dressed. I said, we're going to start TV in a half hour, and these guys, union, production company, they got to have a break. They're lucky, we're lucky. They run a little overtime. They gave me leeway because they liked me. And I said, go tell him to come. No Vader. He ain't coming. He's getting dressed. So I marched down there, but Paul has left before me. Paul's got shorts on and flip-flops. Think about this, how the business changed, right? He's an agent. He was wearing flip-flops.
it was just an acceptable thing in WCW.
Yeah. So I see Paul, and I'm coming down the hallway, and this was at Center Stage. In the back of Center Stage, the stairs in the back of the hallway, you could see them go like this. And they had these big wooden boxes that they had production stuff in. Paul says, get out there, you gotta get out there now. And Vader went like that, and Paul turned, and he bear-pawed him. Boom, in the face, and grabbed Paul as Paul was going down in front, face locked, and shoved him in the box. Well, I know Paul Orndorff forever, before he was a wrestler. And as they pulled him aside, everybody wanted to hold Paul back. I said, let them straighten this thing out. Paul went over with his bad arm and hit him right on the chin. Vader fell on his knees, and Paul field goaled him right on the chin. And his head actually touched his heels, okay? Now everybody's mulling around. They pushed Paul into one of the dressing rooms. Vader, I got to give him credit. He came in and said, let's go. And Ming stepped in and said, no, nothing's going to happen. And both of them.
That was the thing. That was the other thing that Vader pointed out. He said that he wasn't knocked out, and it was Ming that ultimately separated the fight. So I guess there is some
truth to it, but Paul field goaled him. But if he had cowboy boots on,
it would have been over.
It would have been over. It was over anyway. I mean, his face was all swelled up. Yeah.
And something happened backstage in WCW at a time when you were probably at one of your peaks in popularity in America with Paul Orndorff.
My God.
We've heard a lot of his side of the story.
Hey, stop right there. You know what? Paul has made a living talking about this night. And one of the things he says, and you know what? I understand Paul's sick. I guess he's got throat cancer, is that right?
Yeah.
So, it's hard to say this, but, I was there that night, and Paul had a crippled right hand. His right hand was the same size as my wrist, all the way up to his shoulder. And that's the hand he hit me with. So, real quick, I got to tell the story because I've heard Paul, it's like he won't let it die. It's like 20 years ago he was saying this, and then today he's still saying it. He's still doing interviews about it. And one of the things he said was, I got 5 extra years of my contract. He kind of smiled. And I need to speak out because I never have, really. But this is the honest to God's truth, so help me God. Eric Bischoff called me at 8 a.m. at the Marriott and said, Leon, you have promised me pictures for a photo shoot for weeks. You got to do them today or you're fired. And he said, I'm not kidding. So, hey, you get up and you go. 4-hour photo shoot, and grueling, it's exhausting. And, where you had to go in your street clothes and then, put your hot stuff on, get all pumped up, put your uniform on, and then start posing, right? And then, that photo doesn't look good. Let's do it again. That photo doesn't look good, So it just became grueling. And I had told Eric, please call over and tell someone that I'm going to be late because I'm doing this. And of course, he didn't do it. So I just did a photo shoot. I had my bag and I went into the room and sat down. Like, whew, I just did that traffic that, from the Atlanta Towers over to the CNN Center.
Yeah.
And so what, you're going to sit down, right? So I sat down. He came in and said, "You're fucking late. Why are you late?" And I was trying to explain to him. I said, "Paul, like, politely, Paul, I mean, didn't someone tell you I'm fucking doing this photo shoot?" And didn't Eric tell you? And he said no and told me a fucking thing. I said, "Well, that didn't give you a reason to fucking mistreat me." So then I said, if that's not good enough for you, you can go fuck yourself, because I've had it. I mean, this is, I'm not getting cussed out by you. You're not my boss. And he thought he was. And you know what? I had been told specifically that during that period of time, Dusty Rhodes was my boss, period. And Eric Bischoff, those two. Other than that, no one is above you. Those two guys.
Yeah.
And I think Sting had the same arrangement. Hogan had, well, maybe even a different arrangement. Maybe Eric Bischoff couldn't tell him what to do. But that's neither here nor there. So he turned around and walked out. And Terry Tater comes in and gets me, "Leon, regardless of where you were or, we got to do some interviews." So I got my mask, took my shirt off, got my rubber hose so I could pump up, and I'm running to do the interviews. And Paul steps in and blocks me from going to the interviews. And he called me everything in a book and threatened me to my face to face. So I slapped him. I thought that was a threat to my well-being and my safety. Hey, you're going to tell me you're going to beat the hell out of me? Well, I'm going to defend myself. So I slapped him. His feet came off the ground, and he hit his back hit the cement, and his head just missed this steel toolbox where we put the tools to put the ring together. Right. I thought, my God, if his head hit that, I'm done. I mean, don't matter why I'm late. I mean, if his head hits that and he's hurt, I'm fired and probably go to jail. And so I went over and put my hand on his chest. "Paul, are you okay?" And he was coming to, because he hit the ground hard. I slapped the shit out of him. So Paul's got a right arm about the size of this wrist all the way up. And he's 200 pounds. I mean, he's really in bad shape, physically. He's not the Paul Orndorff that you would, that 260, 270 pound guy. He's like 200 pounds, 215. And so when he gets up, and I'm thinking, you know what? If I fight him back and do what I think I should do to defend myself, I'm going to get fired at the very least, and maybe I'm going to hurt him, because he's just. So I thought I had slapped him initially, so I wanted to get that back. So I let him hit me in the face, and it was nothing. It was that weak right hand. And he hit me a second time, hit me a third time. I drug him down with me. And Paul, some of the wrestlers helped Paul up, and he kicked me once or twice before I got up. I remember that, and I got up and grabbed him, and we went into the coach's room, fighting like a wrestling type fight. But that was it. He had boots on. And I don't know why that matters, but I guess if you're barefoot and slippers on, it's harder to fight somebody, right? But it was, I'm late, so what's he doing with slippers on? He's an agent. He's got his boots on. I mean, and then the next day, how Paul had beat me up. And what they're seeing is those 3 hits to the face. And I mean, it was like my 12-year-old son hitting me in the face. My role was to be the bad guy, beat everyone up.
Yeah.
So everyone that I wrestled, I was spudding, right?
Yeah.
So it's like Regal. I remember Steve Regal. I mean, I kicked the shit out of Steve because it was my job to, And he was very vocal about all that, I said, "Yeah, you're not so tough now." And I said, "Steve, fuck." So I just shut up and walked away.
Is it true that Ming was involved in breaking that up?
Yeah. In other words, when I took him into the coach's room, Amin came up behind me and said, "Leon, that's enough. You're going to hurt him." And at that point, I didn't want to mess with Ming, because that would have been a mistake, I think.
He's one of the people that...
you know what? Not only was he fresh, I just kept on fighting, but no, you don't want to mess with me.
Did you ever get the chance to see him in action in a bar?
I never did, but I'd heard about him. That sometimes is the worst not seeing, because you say, well, that it ain't so good, or it is really good, but sometimes you can't see. But that whole thing with Paul, and it's like, how many times have you heard that interview lately? He's still telling the same story. He's still getting over on this thing. It's like his thing, his claim to fame. So he's hanging on to that bullshit story, and that's exactly what it is. It's bullshit.
And ultimately, you got released over that. And
No.
no.
Ultimately, Eric Bischoff, and this was probably the second mistake I made, because getting into, slapping Orndorff felt good, but it was wrong. I mean, no way should I punch first, right? He got in my face. I said, go. I should have told him to go and take his best shot, and once he did, then I could have, done anything I want with impunity. But so that was the first mistake. The second mistake was when Eric, he did send me home, and he, I had heard that I was going over Hogan on the first Nitro, which was coming up, and I was in suspension. So they were going to bring me out of suspension, like this big thing.
To have a surprise.
Yeah, surprise. And
because at that point, they hadn't made the deal with Luger, and they were looking for something big.
And I was going around Hogan. Yeah, they were looking for something big. And, I had heard that, much to my surprise, Eric was in my corner saying, hey, Leon, he's a hard worker, and he took that WCW belt for a year and never once, they had a bad match.
And you were on the opening, actually, for the first Nitro, even though you never wrestled on Nitro. So that really adds some...
So I heard that, and then, so Eric says, well, during this period of time off, we want you to take a 6-month pay cut, and that's a lot of money. I said, Eric, for this? I mean, I said, I can't see 6 months pay cut. I mean, that's a half your salary. That's what? Close to $400,000 fine. Shit, man. I mean, how about 150, 200? I mean, something's, and he wouldn't come off that. And so I told Eric that if that was his decision, that I was going to go elsewhere, and that.
And I just wanted to bring up, you did mention your salary close to $400,000. I don't know if you want to talk about it, we can cut this out.
That was half of it.
Yeah, that was half it. I'm only going to bring this up because there was a recent podcast with Bruce Pritchard, and it was brought up on that podcast that you were making about around that 750 range, and Bruce Pritchard shot it down and said, no, there's no way Vader would have been making that much.
How in the bleep would Bruce Pritchard, WWE official, know what I was making in WCW? Because the only two people that really know what I made was Eric, and I guess the WCW officials, the suits, and my agent and me.
So
and
without saying the number,
everything else was just, Ric Flair. Oh, come on, Eric, tell me. So Eric shoots out a number to make Rick happy, and Eric's not going to, Eric was under contract. I mean, he had signed my contract, and it said, confidentiality. We had a confidentiality clause. I didn't want no one to know. So, I mean, Flair, I'm not trying to badmouth Flair, but someone, hey, heard something and said something, so.
So basically, due to that pay cut reason, that's when you started talking to WWE?
Well, the fine.
Oh, the fine.
I didn't want to take the fine.
Yeah.
They said, you take the 6-month suspension and this fine, and you can come back. And you know what? And I said, come back with my full contract. In other words, he said, yeah, I'll do that for you. And in other words, the 6 months wasn't going to be deducted, which was very fair on Eric's part. And see, that didn't stick in my mind that I'd come back even after 6 months. Things would have been, I could have been in great shape, lost some weight, got tan, then came back and made a real run out of it.
So what made you make the big jump finally?
Well, I got a settlement, so we settled out on my contract, which was substantial because it was like, I don't know, six years left. But, if you multiply those 6 years of what I would have made, so it was a bad mistake on my part. But what, I don't know. I think pride. And, pride and business don't work. So that was a big, big mistake.
Another incident that happened in WCW that's pretty famous, I'm not sure if you were there for it, but
with Vader and Paul Orndorff. Were you with the company at that time?
I was with the company at that time, but I wasn't there at the time of the flip-flop, supposedly incident, fight, knuckle fight, punched out, whatever, beat down with the flip-flops. I wasn't there for that, and really I heard, bits and pieces of the story, two different sides of the story. A lot of times, you hear one side of the story, and by the time it gets to you, shit done been added to it. So it's really hard to say on what really went down in that situation because I wouldn't see it for my own self, with my own eyes.
Yeah, when we talked to Vader about it, he mentioned that Paul Orndorff wasn't actually in flip-flops because he was an agent. So I don't know if it was common for agents to wear flip-flops backstage in WCW.
At that given point in time, it really wasn't. Most agents and stuff, they came in dressed like agents and stuff most of the time and stuff. So
he also said that Haku actually was the one that broke it up. So I guess only Haku might know exactly what happened in that room.
Right. Like I say, of course, anytime there's a fight or there's a dispute in the argument, they're going to let the boys go ahead and get in 1-2 shots. I'm going to let you go ahead and get off 2. He's going to go ahead and get off 2 shots, whatever it is. And then now, okay, let's break the shit up because eventually we still got to work together. You know what I mean? Solve the problem, squash it, let's be done with it. But you still got to work together. And then again, when you're talking about an agent and somebody in that position, now you have to be worried about your job, more so.
I got to almost fight Paul Orndorff in a dressing room, which, John, you always tell me would have been a bad idea, but who knows? You're probably right.
We got to hear that story. We got to hear that story about you and Paul Orndorff.
Oh, no, we're in one of Herb's dressing rooms. You asked me for a photo, Devin, and I sent it to you earlier today. I don't know if you can show it if you have that. It's like one of the most ridiculous photos I've ever taken out of millions of ridiculous photos where I've got the leopard skin tights. And I was pretty freaking jacked in that photo. And, I was like 135 pounds. I was benching like 315 legit. I was on a lot of gas. I had pretty decent genetics. I looked like a little mini freak of nature. And I walked into the locker room to get ready for one of the events. And somebody, I forget who it was, turned to Orndorff and goes, "Hey, Mr. Wonderful, this guy's got a better physique than you." And Orndorff turns to me. I never met him before. And he goes, "Fuck that guy." And I'm like, "Well, fuck you then, buddy." And he said, this is the early 90s, man. I mean, there was no catering in the dressing rooms. Catering was alcohol and cocaine. So we were all pretty geared up in the Herb Abrams days. Herb added to that mix. He really further geared everybody up. So that was it. That's what happened with Orndorff. It was someone told him I had a better body than him. He didn't like that. He came at me with a fuck you. I went back to him. He stepped toward me. I stepped toward him. Bunch of guys jumped in the middle, cooled it off, and that was it. That's all there is to tell. No more than that.
So you fared better than Vader. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, Orndorff got the better of Vader, right?
Yeah.
I've been in several near fights with some pretty name guys. Brian Knobs, Test, a bunch of others. Ultimate Warrior, which I'm convinced I would have won that one. He's huge and strong, but that's about it. But I'll tell you this, after talking with hundreds of people throughout the years, yourself included, John, I now have to say that I would have got my ass handed to me by Paul Orndorff. So there you go.
And when you were in Atlanta, you feuded with Paul Orndorff. How was he to work with?
Paul?
Yeah.
I didn't work against him.
Oh, no?
He big faces down there.
Okay.
He was a good man to work with. We tag teamed up a lot.
Okay.
And Paul's a hell of an athlete in his day.
Were you there when he bit off Tony Atlas's ear around that time?
He bit on it. I wasn't there. But anyway, Paul is a half-ass savage. He fight down to the bone. He probably just bit Tony's ear to make Tony just back off of him. Tony's a big old rough house, boy. Tony had us nobody joke. Plus, he was full of that sauce.
You told me that you recently watched the shoot interview we did with Vader, and you heard him talking about his infamous.
I
backstage
like
fight.
Leon. He's a nice guy. And I'm sure he's an even nicer guy now because he was, under a lot of pressure back then, and he was a moody kind of guy. And I went back and I recently, like in this last week, I listened to what Vader said again, Leon. And so what I will tell you about Leon's part, he came into the center stage. I didn't know he was doing photo shoots before that. That was news to me. I take him at his word for that. He was in a horrible mood. Now you have to understand, we're doing television that's going to air on the Superstation that you're basing your entire pay-per-view and house shows off of. And you got a spot called Interview with Vader to promote whatever it was at the time. And that spot has to be filled sometime in the night. And you're running out of time as a production team. You're running out of time to fill that spot. And since he's in the main event, you can't really replace it. So I was the one still running guys for interviews, and it was Paul Orndorff, Terry Taylor, Kevin Sullivan, and Tony Schiavone, who were sort of in charge of trying to figure out what to do because they were desperate to get Vader, who's the one interview they had left. And they originally asked me, go ask Leon that we need to do this promo. It's the only promo we have left. I don't remember exactly what Leon said to me, but it was more of the lines of get lost. And I'm being nice. Probably using words I can't use here. And so I went out. Well, I didn't want to stooge the guy off, but they wanted an answer. So I said, what happened? He goes, I don't think he's coming anytime soon. They go, why? I said, he just seems to be in a bad mood. And so then Terry Taylor, that part was true. Terry Taylor went. I sort of tagged along with Terry Taylor, and he sort of gave the same lip service to Terry Taylor and indicated there wasn't a very positive chance of that happening anytime soon. Well, Paul, who was also part of the team at the time, Paul's like, this guy's being a prima donna. This is wrestling. We got a show to do. He needs to come out and do an interview, he's a big star, be a man, do the interview. I don't care what's going on in your life. And so he went and he asked, him and Vader got into it. They moved into an office where it was just them. Okay. And I heard a lot of back and forth. There was a fight. I didn't see the fight. I'm not going to say I heard the fight. But when Leon, I love you. I hope you live another 50 years. I'm praying for you. But when he says that the bad arm hit him and didn't hurt him, when Leon White came out of that room, his face looked like it exploded. There was Orndorff must have got him right in the right place. His whole face, not only his nose and his cheeks, his whole face looked like it exploded. You ever see like the gray black bins that would put like ice in, put water in so that you get? He threw all the water out of one of those bins. It was just ice and melted ice. Held his breath probably for about 15 minutes and would go under, to try to get the swelling to go down. So, Leon, I love you, but when you said he didn't hurt you, your face looked like it exploded. I'm sorry. That's just the truth.